I gotta take the goddamn bag.
So what was the worst
Yeah,
crime that you
me
ever committed
too.
consisting of
I
I
took the
love
goddamn
so
bag.
much.
That's not that bad.
I followed Hutch's plan.
I don't know this Hutch.
If you want to know,
His name is
if
Hutch
you don't want to
Vano.
know what
I
kind
know
of
one
heinous
Hutch,
crime
but
he
I don't
done, why
know
don't you read his
romance.
autobiography?
Yeah, it's in my autobiography.
Where can I get your autobiography?
He'll be coming to
I can't.
Soulsville soon.
I tried to
General
say
Stores.
something and
Oh,
then
I
I
can't
just
believe
keep
it.
laughing so hard.
I love role playing. Whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, western, tabletop, or text, it's a way to escape the humdrum of a normal day and step into a totally different world and reality, actively building a character that may or may not change the world for the better. But when racism gets involved, it puts a whole new nasty spin on the whole thing and pulls me right back into the realization that I can never just exist without being reminded of what I am in the eyes of others. So today we're going to be exploring racism and how it portrays itself in role-playing community. In the current climate we live in, racism is becoming a more talked about issue than ever before, as it should be. And with the biggest offenses caused with racist intent, we should also look at the smallest offenses. These small offenses are those that happen every day, the kind that you might do a double take to or grit your teeth so you don't say something sideways and look like the asshole in the situation. These small offenses go by a name, and it's called microaggressions. Microaggressions are defined in the dictionary as an indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. These offenses are so discreet that they usually just seem like something innocent. See, a lot of people define racism as just some person shouting the worst slurs he can think of at the top of his lungs or saying some nasty stuff that's clearly looked down upon in any normal social setting. But sometimes it's a little harder to pinpoint without having enough cognizance to look for it. And let me give you an example before we get started. Hair touching. Now, this is something that many Black people experience at least once in their life. As someone that they don't know who has zero permission runs their unknown sausage fingers through the Black person's hair. Or people just ask if they can touch it. It's weird, it's gross, it feels like you're being treated like some kind of exotic pet when it happens. It's a feeling I, among many others, absolutely cannot stand. Hence the creation of a great game called Hair Nah by Momo Pixel, calling for people to leave her hair alone and keep their hands to themselves. It's built to visually convey the anxiety and stress a Black person feels when having to defend their hair and their personal space from people actively touching them. Even a Forbes article by Dr. Janice Gasson speaks on this issue that still continues to this day. She states, for centuries, people of African descent have been ogled and treated like zoo animals, all for the sake of entertainment and the public's fascination with their features and body, which have routinely been labeled as other. Asking to touch a Black person's hair is likely to conjure up feelings of otherness and makes an individual feel like they are on display, with their body being seen as entertainment for their white counterparts. If you were not aware that this was an offense, I'm so happy to be the one to help teach you about microaggressions and how they can portray themselves. Like I said, they're seemingly everyday things that mean nothing to the perpetrator and everything to the one subjected to it. When it comes to roleplay, hair touching definitely could show up, but it's not one of the biggest things that I've come face to face with so far in a gaming or a roleplay scenario. And not everything that's been experienced is technically a microaggression. It could also be cultural appropriation and worse. And we'll get to those too. So let's get to the 3 biggest things that I've noticed in roleplay. Name games, dumbing down speech, and modern day minstrel shows. Yeah, those shows. And this is something that is exclusively a Black, Indigenous, and people of color issue. If there's a name with a variation past Karen or Mitchell, it's suddenly too difficult to say the name correctly. Considering the real-life affairs going on now with Kamala Harris's name being repeatedly said incorrectly,
Her name is pronounced comma, like the punctuation mark la. Kamala. Kind of a
So
bare
I'm
minimum, that's all.
disrespecting her by mispronouncing her name unintentionally. So it begins. You're not allowed to criticize Kamala Harris or whatever
Kamala. No,
because
it's
Kamala
No, it's
Harris.
this is a perfect time to talk about it. Many people rightfully get up in arms about the way a name is pronounced. Being given nicknames without receiving permission to do so, or being given someone else's name just because they're from a similar background. It promotes a feeling of otherness, just like the hair touching, refusing to learn someone's name, giving unwanted nicknames, or making assumptions based on those names. In the simplest way, that tells that person, you're not important enough for me to respect you at a base level. Forbes recently published an article on Stephen Curry turning down a powerhouse like Nike to be the spokesperson for Under Armour after being continuously referred to as Stefan. JJ Hebert, president of Mindster Media, speaks about Nike's blender's pitch, saying, pronouncing someone's name wrong might not seem like that big of a deal, but it can make all the difference when pitching a client or partner. Our brains are stimulated when we hear our own names. Having someone repeatedly pronounce your name wrong robs the listener of the powerful yet subtle emotions that come from hearing it. Uzumaka Duba, an actress from the series Orange is the New Black, spoke on the subject of people not being able to say her name and asking her mother if she could just shorten it to Zoe.
And she stopped and gave that mother look that only mothers know and have and said, why? And I said, because no one can say Ozamaka. And she looked at me and she said, if they can learn to say Tchaikovsky and Michelangelo and Dostoevsky, then they can learn to say Ozamaka.
I've had several real-life experiences with witnessing or being a recipient of these name games. However, we'll just use what we've learned here in the real world and see how it affects the gaming and roleplay world. In the roleplay world, I have two Black female characters, for example, Kamaria and Maya. Kamaria is often asked if her name can be shortened or if she can just use a nickname like Kay or Cammy. And when she refuses to take a name, she's either given one anyway, her name is pronounced incorrectly despite multiple corrections, or not said at all because they don't want to even try it. Maya's name has encountered wild things despite its shortness, like Maya, mayo, mayonnaise, mire, myrrh, even murder. And when she's corrected others, she's met with the same irritated refusal to correct themselves. And both of them have experienced someone not knowing their names at all and just dubbing them something like Shaniqua or Bonquiqui because of how they look. People of color fight these minute battles all throughout their lives, trying to retain that validation in their names that give them identity and a direct connection to their culture. So give them a break and do the right thing. If you're realizing you're guilty of this, there's a TED Talk featuring Gerardo Ochoa that walks through several ways you can learn to approach people's names appropriately in the description. For now, we're moving on. As these are examples of things that I specifically have run across, there are so many variations of this issue for other people of color that is important to keep in mind. But for the purpose of this specific talk, we'll focus on the Black side of things. Many people like to emulate how Black people talk. Some do it in an attempt to relate, some do it to mock, and some do it because they believe that we can't understand what's being said unless it's in that tone.
I can't understand your accent.
Next bus to Bikini Bottom.
Oh, why didn't you say so?
So let's take a crash course on what Black Vernacular English, BVE, or African American Vernacular English, AVE, is and how it's abused. Black vernacular English is also commonly known as, well, Abe. It's rooted in both African dialects and or Caribbean Creole English varieties. These linguistic patterns are a part of a cultural legacy that continues on even after the transatlantic slavery. Those who were enslaved invented their own separate version of English to speak to each other, forming unity, identity, and communication without interference from white enslavers. However, when people who are not Black attempt to mimic BVE, especially when doing so for their own self-benefit, they're performing something else entirely. The term for that is cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is described as what happens when elements of one culture are used, caricaturized, or tokenized for commercial or entertainment purposes of another culture. To understand why this causes people to balk when BVE is used by anyone who is not of that culture, we have to look at how BVE is treated. It's not treated like a real dialect. In fact, it's often referred to as improper English, and its users are seen as uneducated. As a result, this can be used against Blacks when doing things like looking for employment or seeking access to higher institutions. However, when those who are not of Black descent use the same vernacular, they have the opportunity to switch in and out of the dialect with no repercussions to their finances, their opportunities, or their overall character, something that Black people can never do. And for the roleplay community, it's rampant. Whether it's a quote-unquote ghetto character who is clearly white or played by a white individual delving deep into BVE, or someone playing as a Black character who is not Black themselves in order to circumvent being reprimanded for using BVE. Which leads us to the last big thing I've noticed. This is something that's not gone away. In the roleplay environment, it has evolved over time, becoming something more acceptable because it's harder to recognize what it is without referring to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So what are minstrel shows? According to Wikipedia, they are performances originating from the early 19th century where each show consisted of comic skits, variety acts, dancing, and musical performances that depicted people specifically of African descent. The shows were performed by mostly white people in makeup or blackface for the purpose of playing the role of Black people. Every portion of a minstrel show is meant to mock, belittle, and stereotype every instance of Black people, even ending the majority of the shows with a musical plantation skit. Even though blackface became largely unaccepted and began to dwindle from the public eye of entertainment as civil rights movements began their upsurge, something remained and evolved into something more digestible for the new age: digital blackface. Okay, now buckle up. Digital blackface is, in its simplest form, when a non-person of color takes images and clips of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and uses them to describe a feeling or a reaction. It paints a specific picture about the race they portray, which is often a long-standing stereotype, such as, sassy or hypersexualized Black women or violent and angry Black men. Aaron Wong studied this phenomenon in depth, stating, quote, "While digital blackface may not appear to have the same degree of consequences as institutional racism, its usage and circulation in digital language and communication normalizes those kinds of racist attitudes in culture and society, and may lead to the current increase in hate crimes." Another portion of minstrel shows that survived is the stump speech. The stump speech is something found even in today's politics. Something that's used to almost declare to the media that the speech is almost concluded, as it's repeated verbatim to every crowd the politician speaks to. Originally, it derived from politicians standing on a tree stump to deliver a speech to a crowd. In terms of minstrel shows, the stump speech mimicked this, but with awful intention. The stump speech in this case was littered with nonsense sentences and puns delivered in a parody version of Black vernacular English. Remember I talked about dumbed down speech a little while ago? If you want an example of this, there is an entire stump speech right here on YouTube for you to experience. Same thing for examples of minstrel variations. The links are in the description. I'm not putting any of those videos in this video today. And sure, I could understand if people do believe that claiming some of the things in roleplay being a minstrel show would be a bit of a stretch. I can understand that. But in times where society has become more aware of racial slights, people have had to become more subtle in their slights in order to still portray their message with less chances of being reprimanded. And sometimes it's just plain ignorance. So with what we've learned, and with the information that we've gone over, we can identify that this clip is showing digital blackface with an emphasis on a dumbed down version of Black vernacular English, knowing that the person playing this role is a non-Black individual. From the responses of the crowd, in and out of character, this is all meant for the entertainment gain of everyone else around this character. And this situation happens everywhere in roleplay communities on a consistent basis. And just think, this isn't even the beginning of all of the microaggression scenarios experienced. Aside from the things listed previously, there's still things like, "you all look alike" types of statements. Non-people of color immediately viewing Black, Indigenous, and people of color as aggressive, scary, or untrustworthy with no reasoning behind it. Playing the racist or Black card jokes. And so much more that could be added to this segment. But if I listed everything, we'd be here forever. So we're not going to do that. These small, seemingly innocuous offenses create a foundation for roleplay communities far and wide and are exhausting for those who are the targets of these offenses. And without an appropriately diverse staff to recognize and stop this behavior in its tracks, it's more likely that these situations will continue to be exacerbated within the community and further built upon. And no, I don't mean including only one Black and one female person among a mostly white male staff. That's not enough. For the players, you can help with this too. Be conscious of what you say and how you behave around Black, Indigenous, and people of color players and their characters. Be vocal when you see these microaggressions taking place and make it known that it's not okay. Remember, being silent is being complicit. And for the players who see nothing wrong and are finding themselves getting angry at this whole video, I want you to take a step back and ask yourself why that is. And for the funny people that utilize a lot of these things listed intentionally for your roleplay comedy routines, you need a better routine. If this is what you're leaning on, your routine was never funny to begin with. Thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. I do want to say thank you to the Slippery Eel. He's amazing. He's the one who kind of gave me a little nudge in this direction to actually make a video on this. So I really do appreciate that little push to make my anger into something more productive that maybe somebody can learn from. And he has a Twitch, so if you want to go and pay him a visit, he's a real chill guy, real cool guy. And he's also a part of the role-playing community as well, so give him a shot. And if you want to give me a shot and see some roleplay on my side or just something more relaxing, my link's in the description below. And thanks again, and you all take care of yourselves, all right?